All right. Welcome everyone on the next multi-networking community sync. Today is November 22nd, and I have again going to want to drive the discussion about complexity. If you have other topics, please be free to add. If anyone wants to bring up something quicker to talk, um, you have the floor for a second. If not, because I think that the rest, the complexity stuff is gonna take us a bit longer. Anyone has any other topics to talk?
I guess this can go second, but something I'm kind of thinking about is, we got this kind of like pushback a bit at
Mhm.
KubeCon about the possibility of getting landing changes to say the pod object. Maybe we should come up with some like concrete next steps in terms of finding out like exactly what the requirements are for that stuff. So I guess I'll put it as next steps for determining requirements um for API changes. So
And
yeah,
that's
go for it.
good because I think this fits as well from I think what other kind of part I want to do about the requirements. So first I wanted to go through requirements to see if, for the sake of reduction of uh, complexity, to see if there's some requirements we could drop or reduce or slightly change. That was one thing. The second part, I was thinking maybe what you're saying is, could we kind of go over the phase one elements that we are changing and see if we can either just drop something or change something to reduce the scope, right? One thing I just want to add that a multi-networking, I think slightly unjustifiable, is being compared to DRA. And I am not a DRA specialist. I'm not so familiar with the implementation, but apparently DRA does quite a lot. It changes like most of the elements in Kubernetes. With some of them, when I heard about them, they are pretty quite complex on how they do this, right? Example being the scheduler has its own can introduce an additional controller, and there's now even now there is not defined timeout on how long this can controller be called for and being wait for. So I wonder whether we should look at what we are doing and see if there's pieces that we can reduce. I was thinking about this in my head, and unfortunately, we are touching like every element as well. Not in the same scope as the array, like not the same level of complexity. But if someone would say, no, we are not the array, but we are touching everything anyway, that's kind of I think the problem, right? So I think the other exercise we could do is just go over what we do at least in phase one and see whether we is there some places where we can just reduce things. Does that kind of align, Doug, with what you were thinking to do?
Yeah, I think they're both interconnected things. It's yeah, totally.
Michael?
I do want to say that I think, let me lower my hand, is that we need to, I think, reduce our scope, but also kind of circle back to what the original plan for what multi-network is, and that is to
Right.
provide multiple networks inside a pod. Nothing more and nothing less. And we need to probably look at other projects and see how we can leverage them, because I know there's like talks of multi-network and services, multi-network and IPAM, multi-network and scheduling. I think the IPAM scheduling services should be stripped out and someone else can solve that. We are simply putting multiple networks in a pod. And
Yeah.
once you start talking scheduling, I think that's where people start falling apart.
Yeah, I agree with you, and this is something that yeah, I agree. So is that okay? What do you think that's kind of worth going through those requirements again and see what we can drop? Is that a good exercise? That's let me know, because maybe I'm
Yes.
wasting everyone's time.
No, I think what we should do is say, like, I see scheduler. Instead of just say dropping it, saying how can we leverage,
yeah,
another
exactly,
solution.
exactly that. Exactly. I would like to see on if there's an alternative, if there is something that we could do exactly without this, without the core, do it externally, or if any sort of workaround that we would introduce, can we live with that? Right? That's the question as well. So that's let's, because we already have Multus in some ways and it works, right? And most of us are using it, and see how it's done there, and what would happen if we keep doing it that way. Of course, there's a limit. I think I would draw the line about pod change. I think annotations, we want to move away from those, at least for identifying which stuff I want to do, because then we can open the CRI. I think this is where I would draw the line. Michael?
Maybe I should unmute myself. When you say draw the line at annotations, is that a means to like say, hey, we're going to use annotations on the pod spec to prove this out, and then in our roadmap, we'll eventually, push for a field? Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. I'm saying that I would like to have draw the line of how much we want to reduce, because I think that the core change, at least phase one should be doing, is listing out the pod networks in the pod. I think this should be the one thing that let's keep that part, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't go with annotation here and there, but I think pod spec change, I think this is where I would want to keep, because if we don't change that, kind of what is the value added for the phase one or for the whole effort, right? Thoughts on?
Agreed. I would just say that if that's the thing that's people are latching onto, then
Okay.
annotations are a great means to POC and say, hey, this works. And then say after it works, after we have the evidence, then say we should push that. I don't know if that's the concern. So if that's the big concern, that's my assumption that, that's where people are getting hung up. So if annotations are the way, if if
Right.
that's where the people are getting stuck on, I'd say that annotations are great. However, we need a hardened set of agreements that if we hit checkbox A, B, and C, we can get our pod network field.
Okay, yeah, that's fair, Michael. Yeah, and that can be okay. Yeah, because that's good, because then we can phase things out even further, right? Even better, stating, okay, for now just annotation, but with the agreement that, let's say, in half a year we could transition to just an object, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Crawl,
Let's
walk,
do that
run.
as one as well. Yeah, this is so. First, let's go over, because what I'm feeling is as well there is as well aspect of what we just want to do now and what we want to do long term. All right. For now, we kind of, yeah, we are saying it's just those little things, but this is just the first step, and then in 2 years I want to do this much, right? So I wonder if there is something we can the big picture, change the big picture as well a bit, to kind of reduce the complexity on that. So and what you're saying, Michael, I want to go into details for phase one as well, to and what Doug was mentioning, to go over those to see, okay, so first we want to list like one pager on what we are changing, and then go step by step on what we can kind of modify or reduce to do things. All right, does that sound good?
Yeah, as long as we include in that one pager that our goal is literally we provide multiple networks to a pod, and that is it.
Yeah, exactly. So even here, let's keep that in mind, Michael, right? If we want to say that what you just said, right? What of those things we can drop and get kind of away from? Okay, so let's keep this up. Let me maybe zoom this a
Let's
bit.
trim this list.
Yeah, let's just try zoom a bit here too. All right, so first is, I think, backward compatibility. Multi-network should not change the behavior. Yeah, that's just a statement. I mean, should not change anything, so one stays. Represent explicit as an API construct. So this is about introducing the object itself. Multi-network represent as an API construct. So I think we do want to at least introduce an object, right? That's something that it's just new core object that's there, and that will be then at least the one value added, right? If we go, let's say, first stage will be just annotations everywhere, at least one value added for this whole thing will be the object itself. I think this is what it states. No opposition, and I will translate the silence as an agreement.
So
But
one thing we might consider if
yeah,
we're trying to simplify things is we've got this model where there's a default network.
Mhm.
I don't know if what I'm about to say is going to make sense, but the idea I've got in my head is, would it be possible for if you are not using any of this multi-network stuff, to not have a default network and therefore not have the extra resources? Would that help, or would that be helpful, make things seem simpler for people?
I would say so, yes, because that's something that we need to discuss as well, because I think even in our phase one, introduction of the default network introduces more complexity. I want to change kubelet for it. I need to do some auto population. So that's something to discuss, but we will get there. Pete, can we get back to that point? Because I do want
Yeah,
to
sure.
discuss that one, but let's go over those and see whether when we maybe we can talk about the phase one in details. I do want to talk about the default network because I agree with you. It does introduce quite a lot. It is in its core, it's simple, but all the things around it, like for example, migration, right? We had a requirement to state that you can change default network in long term, right? So the way I was thinking of how I can change the default network from one spec to the other spec, it's so elaborate, right? It's so complex. So yes, this is a default network kind of introduces quite a lot, but there are consequences of this. So let's get back to that. All right, so we want to have the object, the couples, the implementation. Yeah, so basically this is all about this one. Potential function as a handle that decouples the implementation class abstraction. So this is just the definition of how the object should be. So we don't have to worry about. Again, how the object should be, shall provide cluster generic options only. Yeah, that's all good. Can a reference implement specific parameters? That's good as well. Or I think this is a core, right? The object itself, the pod network, is that one complex? Is anyone seeing? Because right now what we ended up with, we have like two fields, provider and the parameters reference. So basically just two fields. Anyone feeling that's too complex, or I think that's the bare minimum we should still have? And I'm thinking about the parameters.
I mean, this is something that we could trim. I feel like there's implications for scaled use of not having this. But I would say that potentially for like alpha phase, maybe this is the kind of thing that we could mark like beta phase, kind of a thing, so that we try to reduce complexity for version 0 kind of a thing.
That's a fair point, yeah. And basically, if you want to do something with implementation, go with annotations initially, right? Or do something on your own. Yeah, and I'm not sure who's noting, and I appreciate that. Can you just as well call out the number of the requirements? Number 6, we would want to remove. Thank you. Yeah, this is exactly what. Okay, yeah, let's do that. All right, moving on. Pod network is the object application developer will reference in their workloads. Okay, so this is referencing in pod. So this is where Michael, you mentioned, right? We could just initially go with annotation, but for now we definitely need some referencing. So let's think about that one, right? The one trade-off of and I will bring this up now. If we were to just go with annotations for the pod, right? That would mean that maybe step back. What would that mean, right? We would introduce phase one would introduce just the object and ability to reference the object in annotation. And then lastly, we would have, let's say, controller for the new object to handle the conditions. And basically, I think this is where the bug would stop because we couldn't modify the scheduler. We couldn't change the kubelet because it's all annotations, right? Or do you see that this would still be acceptable if we had annotation?
Well, I think we gotta look at the schedulers not in phase one. So, and the annotations is just the temporary piece to get us over this is complex hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
So once we start talking scheduling, people start saying complexity, and modifying the pod initially, people start getting leery. So I think this is what I said earlier, is that let's go with annotations and then come up with a agreeable set of terms that allow us to get a modify the pod spec.
So on that note, you said phase one doesn't change that scheduler. It slightly does. So just to kind of remind all of you, the network object has a readiness flag. And basically what we did wanted to do is if a pod references a network that is not ready through conditions, scheduler will just stop scheduling such pod, right? That was the only change that current phase one KEP has. That's very small change. If you think about this, is just check, okay, pod has networks. If the network is ready, it's not, okay, stop further actions, right? That was the only scheduler change that we did have and have currently in phase one. So there is that one, right? So that would go away because now, or we can keep it based on annotations, right? But as you just said, right, that means we are changing scheduler at all, right? So there is that. So I think we can talk more about this in detail when we're gonna go and put more light onto the phase itself, and we can get back to that. But I think for requirement 7, yeah, let's definitely call out that we would want to, as a more phased approach, go with an annotation, right? Okay. Number 8, cluster default pod network, and exactly there it is. So this is about this is those two. I think number 9 is I think has to be removed anyway because that is unacceptable. So number 9 will okay, no, it says but can be replaced. Okay, cannot be removed but can be replaced. So this is exactly this, right? So default network, a lot of hurdle around that one to represent the current network. That's one part. And the other part is how to be able to replace it, right? So that's what the default network is introducing, but we need alternative for this. What could we do for the default, or should we just say that you can add networks, and in phase one you always will end up with the default network. That's, I'm gonna keep the name, but and you can only specify additional. So default concept of default network will come in later phase.
I was going to say that it probably could stay. However, the part that probably gets me confused is can be replaced. I would say that sounds like, you can't remove the, pod network and replacing it can come later. That was my one initial thought.
So there is that as well. So today, just as a reminder, I'm gonna bring this up, and I'm probably gonna mix, but we have so default network basically should be there, and if we introduce default network, right, the consequence of that is if the pod starts up, it should be listed, right? That was the kind of the current design says if you don't specify the list of pod networks, I will just auto-populate it with the default name, right? And that will entitle that the default network is there, right? It exists, right? So that was the consequence. So now, because of that, then I was planning to condition a node's readiness on this, right? And meaning the node kubelet will get changed as well. And this is another element that we are changing in phase one, where okay, if I don't see default network, I will not say this node is ready. That was another condition to kind of force you or your installation to maybe the other ways to gate your installation until you properly add the default network. If you added it manually, of course, there was a means to automatically add it from KCM. But if you didn't and you choose to manually add it, I would gate all the nodes to stop them to do any work until you add that default network yourself. All right. That was another complexity around the default network. I think I'm mixing the two efforts now, but I think that's the consequence of the default network itself right here.
Yeah, I think maybe I was interpreting default network something different. So
Okay.
can you just clarify for myself what that means again? I know it's somewhere in this document.
It represents today's network that you create your cluster with. Or if you have a let's say you have a cluster which you would want, where you would upgrade and enable multi-networking, the current network will be deemed or marked as the default, right? That's what it says. So basically the network you create a cluster with is the default network, and the default network represents that initial network that you have today. So ETH0 basically is the default network. It represents default. ETH0 is represented by the default network, default pod network. Does that explain, Michael?
Yeah, so that would just be the current state, aka like your Calico, Cilium, and more.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, right? Your flannel, your today's the default flannel. That's your default network, and then and why I'm saying this is backward compatibility, right? I didn't do anything, so I create my pod. I didn't specify any additional networks. If you didn't, I will just I will set the list to default because this is the one that you're connecting anyway, right? I don't change anything. You just connect to default, and that's you're done, right? Because that's what will happen, right? Even if you don't support and fully integrate with the APIs, it's just gonna use the default and that's it. So that was the point of that. So I think let's maybe get back to this one when we're gonna put the phase one more into light, and maybe we can get back to that one because it is what will be happen if we don't specify that, right? What would be the replacement? Do we then don't replace it? And as I said, phase one because that's the option, right? In phase one, we would say you can only specify additional networks, right? So similar. No, in Multus, I'm not sure whether it says the list is explicit, but I think by default, I think most of us are used that Multus just you specify what additional networks you want to add, right? Not explicit list of what's going to be there. So that's the aspect. So let's get back to that one later on. Pods can reference one or more. So this is how we reference things. So basically that the list is explicit, right? So if I list the thing, it has to explicitly list what I'm connecting. There is no inferential that it's the additional interfaces, right? That was kind of comes to what I just mentioned before, where I list only what I'm adding, not and the default network is inferred. It's always added, right? So that's what this requirement is all about. I think so. Let's get back to those three together. They are kind of connected. Because if we don't have it, we cannot have this, right? Then that's something that but maybe my question will be to you all different. Is it something that we can live long term without? Phased approach aside, but let's say long term, because this is kind of the big picture here, right? Is this something that we can live without in long term?
Number 10?
All default network in whole, and then being able to have the list explicit, right? If we eventually go over the hurdle of having a field in the pod spec, and that lists all the networks that I'm connecting to, should that list be explicit, right? So basically, I connect only to those that you list.
This is a tough one to me, for a couple reasons. First of which is I overall would say in a number of ways I can live with it. And so this is really the default network thing in my mind, which is okay, in Multus, you assume you're going to have pod to pod connectivity for all pods over ETH0, and that's always there. And that's part of the net attached F spec, right? Because it's a promise that's in core Kubernetes. I would say, I mean, overall, I can just live with that because that is something that I've lived with for a long time, and it's
You're right.
a like large assumption. But the other thing is, this to me is kind of a differentiator of what we're doing here, which is to say you can have different default networks. I think it's interesting. I would be more apt, and I mean, there's a part of me that says, you know, maybe it's not a bad idea to remove this for a phase one, and maybe it's something to tag as a phase two or something else. And I think that it's important to have some kind of parking lot for stuff that we trim down here, because yeah, but I guess I would say overall, I'm in favor of deprioritizing this. And there's part of me that says if we can make a case with our like most simple, a simplified way of doing this, it maybe gives us a little bit more firepower to add some of the complexity back in. So that's where I'm at. I guess I would say I'm in favor of removing it and then tossing it in a parking lot.
But pushing it out or completely removing?
Pushing it out or completely removing it, I have to say it's hard for me to say I want to do that right now.
Yeah.
I could probably be convinced of it.
So anything if we say like we definitely want to this guy to be what I want to say pushed out. We could explain, but and basically what I would mean is pushing out things would mean putting them in the later phases, right? Slightly
Yeah.
reshuffling things in the phases, right? So your parking would just mean that we reshuffle some things, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
So
I would
that's why
say,
I'm trying to ask if this is something that long term, let's say in 5 years, when we say this is the whole thing, we are done, right? We have all the things. Is this something that we can say we can live without? The whole thing we can live without, right? I think I would like to say no, at least for the use cases that we have up top. We would have to probably skim those as well down. But I think what you're saying is phasing it out to kind of reduce the phasing. I think that's a valid point. All right. Pod does not specify any reference to when POS does not specify any reference. Okay, so this is about default network. So 111 is again exactly the same thing. So this is the default. So if we don't go this and phase this whole thing out, then it's easy. Pod shall be able to provide additional configuration on how it attaches to. Oh, those are additional. Okay, so this is the additional parameters we have in the pod reference, right? We have today like interface name. This one as well has the attachment. So this is something that we want to maybe discuss if that's something that we want to keep, right? Probably we can skim all the additional extra parameters that we have there today, like what is it there? We have interface name and the primary flag probably can go away to not be there. Oh, there's like is default gateway. Those I think fields we can just completely remove. I think those add unnecessary complexion, and just keep a reference to the name of the pod to the object.
so this means that if you wanted to name the interface name at attachment, you could not.
You could
through
not.
this.
No. Yes, that will be a
I
bummer because this is I would say this is a big one maybe. I think
yeah.
to be honest with you, let's keep it and see if we were to go with the annotation route. We can keep it there, right? With what the bare minimum we need, right? And let's discuss it then. Maybe now let's because we don't see what's being changed in phase one, but I think I agree with you. This is something that we could
Yeah, I
keep.
think we want it. Yeah.
Yeah. So every pod connected to specific has to have connected within that and across the cluster. Yeah, that has to stay. This is just how the implementation should do the networking. A pod connect to specific pod minimum and cross connectivity between. Yeah, this is again just how it's implemented. Pods attached to pod networks are connected to each other in manner defined by the. Okay, so this is a GACS. So those are just how the pod network behaves and its stuff. So I think those are good. So phase one is I think we had discussion about the default network plus the maybe removal of the specific parameters. On this one, do we want to remove or just push out, phase it out to the later to later? I would say we can probably expand it in later phase. Thoughts?
Yeah, because so number 6, just to make sure that I've got this right, this is the pod network attachment, right?
No, this is the parameters reference. So pod network
Oh.
can reference to implement specific parameters. You see? So then,
Okay, sorry, I might
yeah.
have gotten this wrong. So
I have the design.
sorry.
I was trying to say this field. Oh, this is
Yeah,
attachment. Sorry.
I
Let me get back to
so at least for me, okay,
this.
sorry, this is my bad, Mache.
No, no worries, no worries.
So when I was saying earlier that we can move number 6 out, I I thought it was pod network attachment, not parameters ref. For me, um, I think that parameters ref is important because the way that I think of this API, at
Mhm.
least for me, is you know, we give a solid base to what people think they're going to need, right? But I feel like it's a just necessary evil that there are going to be times where you have to loft more information to the implementation. And so I see this as like real positive part of the design is that it allows you to extend the implementation. And I I think it's important that way. I I mean, I have multiple thoughts about this because like this example here with network attachment definitions, like people could make a argument that this is strictly worse for a network attachment definitions type of implementation because you have kind of two layers of it, right? Like
Right.
net attached def today, you just put it in annotations and you just have your network attachment definition. But now you would have another layer, which is an object that points to the net attached def, right? So there's that. However, I just think that it's just a reality of an API like this is that it's hard to guess everything that people would need. And I think that having a design that is that specifies some core required parameters that you need, has a number of optional parameters that are useful in many implementations, but then there are implementations that are going to have stuff that we couldn't guess. I would consider a different way to handle this, but I think that it's nice that we have as part of the object a way to say this.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that's where
Michael,
I'm
your
at.
thoughts? Because I think you were pushing back on this. Michael, are you convinced?
I've been silently thinking about this, so I might have to circle back.
Okay. So, because I think what would that mean? It will have just this. This will be the simple example, right? I have an enabled flag here. That's another level of complexity, but we can drill this bit later on. But basically, that would mean we'll have just that. Just saying. Okay. And okay, let's see what we can do about this. All right, let's go back. So number 6 to, let me just maybe add the notes here. All right, let's go phase 2. So pods access to pod network is controlled via RBAC configuration. So this is basically giving some security on who can attach pod networks. And like, if you think about this, would we allow, would the RBAC go on a per pod basis or on a per namespace basis? I think today, do we have service account? If you think about service accounts, those are per pod basis, and then basically you can attach to something or not. But I think this shouldn't be on a pod basis. That might be tricky, right? Or a service account will be representing the pod then, and then we can say, yes, this pod can attach. The service account can attach or cannot. Okay, so yeah, that's possible. So you can have on a service account basis or on a namespace basis. You can go both ways, I think, right, at that point. So I think this is something that will be just enhancement of the security, and basically any very minimal, but at least that level of control of who can use a pod network or not. So if whatever form we would have, I think this is something that we should keep. Any other comments? Okay, I'll keep that as a yes. Implementation agnostic pod network interface information. So basically this is a feedback to expansion of the downward API to return information about the stuff that we passed in, right? So pod network name, IP address, etc. So this is where maybe the the interface name DAC might not be needed, right? If we had this, right, then you see how we wanted to have at least the interface name inside the pod and control that. If we had this properly set up, right, you will have all the information of which pod network is what IP or even interface name, right? So I think this is just an enhancement. Yeah, go ahead.
And for your user to express that like desire for that interface name.
So no, that part no. So no, that's you're looking okay. So you're looking from that point of view. I've been looking at it from the point of view of I said the name of the network of my network foo to foo, right? So then I can easily and directly identify that foo is foo. Foo is connected to the foo network, right? Foo interface is connected to the foo network. You're looking at it just to be able just to change the name at will to whatever, right?
Yeah, at least I guess the kind of case that I have seen before is that people, they want to know the name of the interface in advance. So like whatever in their workload, they're referencing something called netfoo, and they just want to be able to see it right there in the spec to be like,
Right.
okay, I know I'm setting this to netfoo because that's already what my workload expects. That was kind of my like thought process on it, at least.
Nathan?
I think there's maybe a question of complexity from the pod's perspective, because if you consider a pod that's connected to a lot of networks, that means that you have within your pod to do the dance of which interface corresponds to which network, and then pass the configuration to. It's might be easier to just say, oh, this one is if 0, that one is if 1, and just hard code the value.
So you say drop this completely, or just just and have the naming? Which say you're saying? Which way you're leaning?
I'm saying it's so it's still a good thing to be able to have to be able to get the IP address that you've been assigned. But I think it's still worth allowing users to set the interface name, because it's just you don't have to loop through the list.
Right. No, I hear you. Yeah, that's fair. So I think both would have to stay. And okay, yeah, I think this is not a big complexity. I would hope this is part of Kubelet, I think, to expand slightly the existing API, the downward API, to support as well the networking stuff, right? To provide what the IP was assigned, what is the network for it, right? So I think that's good. The thing here, if I'm not mistaken, this would mean, I think we didn't have the requirements for this, but this will mean we'd have to have the pod status there as well, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind, that when we talk annotations, what we do with the pod status with the IP list, that's something that we need to make sure that we get. Someone wants to say something? No. Sumit, you want to say something?
No, I'm good. Sorry,
Okay.
it was just
No,
a
no worries. Okay. All right. So let's keep this then. Pod network and selectively per node available in cluster. This doesn't apply to cluster. Okay, so that's a big one. So this is something that I think even I pushed for, but gives you a availability of pod networks on a limited set of nodes. And here I definitely was thinking of using DRA to implement, right? Because then I could, when a scheduler comes up, I would ask my controller through DRA, the way the DRA is thinking of doing it, I would ask the DRA controller to say, oh, where is this network? Which nodes this network is available on, right? And then it will reply based on its own logic, and then I would know that. Is this something that we can drop and say that pod networks by default are available everywhere? And basically, we today have a multi solution with node selectors, labeling approaches, and mutating webhooks to kind of implement this like that, instead of being able to do that through the scheduler. It's still through scheduler, but just leveraging the existing capabilities like node selectors or resources. Thoughts? I think this one we definitely could drop and live with the mutating webhooks. What do you think, team?
We're looking for stuff to drop. It feels like something that could be dropped. So
Like,
I don't think
I'm thinking about
the impact would be all that great for us. So
right, and I just want to call out that I'm thinking about completely dropping this. So we will never have selective per nodes availability, and then we completely cut off ourselves from DRA because we don't need this. But there is a trade-off, right? The trade-off would be to achieve this, and I know I in my kind of world, I need this. I would have to go with some sort of mutating webhooks to eventually get this. Think about SRLV use case, right? SRLV can be available on just the 2 nodes that you have in your 5-node cluster. How do you limit that to that guy, right?
And I mean, and the bottom line is with SROV, it's going to be more complicated than just marking a node if it has it or not, because you need to know how many
The resources are
of
still there,
which,
right?
right? So I would also give a +1 that this looks like one to remove. If we come back to it and we can't live without it, that's fine. But I mean, I totally understand why people would like or need this, but it does also look like a target for reducing complexity as well.
All right. All right. Let me just note that the requirement, which one is this? And 18. Okay. 19. Okay, so this is, I think, the rest 3 ones. Kubelet network-based probing can be optionally enabled. So Kubernetes API optionally accessible via the none, and so basically, I will just give you a description. Those 3 requirements are all about making the feature parity between default, if we have it or not, with the other pod networks, right? So I can have a pod connected to my network foo, and just to that network, no default, no ETH0. And I can still do webhooks, I can still do probing, I can still do startup readiness probes, liveness probes in a pod. So basically, this is the multi-tenancy aspect, right? That we, notably, we had the whole talk about in KubeCon about multi-network, about multi-tenancy, right? So those are the three requirements that puts the parity between the two. Comments about those three? I think this is definitely something that we can live without in phase one there. That's what, but it's not the case here, right? Is this something that we should drop completely? I wonder, I'm not sure what does this entails as well, because I'm not so familiar with the probing mechanism that we have, and then on top of that, and then connectivity to the other stuff, right? So access to Kubernetes API, is that something that, because we can make it easy or hard? An easy way would be, if you want to achieve this, ensure your pod network in which you are, and let's assume I'm using VLANs, make sure your VLAN has access to the API server. End of story, right? It's we basically don't do, we put everything on the customers, owners of the clusters. Or do we want to do something in kubelet where it be able to expose itself on the other networks as well, right? And make it fully transparent, right?
But depending on the CNI, that might be completely CNI related, implementation related. Sorry. So
That's true, but then there needs to be something coming from us in terms of how would you enable those implementations, right? There needs to be something, right? For example, Kubernetes API, liveness, maybe not even that, like from this point of view of just kubelet, right? Liveness and readiness probes, right? Can that guy just, I mean, maybe, and don't get me wrong, maybe this already exists, maybe, because I never tried this. Maybe it's already there where I can just connect to one network and kubelet through CRI can just probe that container anyway, regardless of what's the IP on it, or on which network it is on. So partially, Nathan, yes, it might be dependent on the CNI, but I wonder whether, like, for example, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was more thinking about 20 and 21. So those two,
yeah, okay,
it's different.
that's fair. Yes, I think that's.
But yeah, again, 19 would probably be require more evolution into the Kubernetes API.
And that's fair. That might be the 20 and 21 might be something that we could maybe do and just push on the implementation. So it should not be a requirement here. Other thoughts? But I think at least this part, we still want to keep it, right?
Yeah, I think it might, it will probably come up for some CNFs that you want to do liveness, not based on the management interface, but on the data interfaces, I guess.
Not that, Nathan. Think about multi-tenancy. I have my web service working in network data plane. And just in the network data plane. That's let me show the picture. This is the use case, right? I have pods connected to various networks and with only one interface, right? All those three basically are all about this use case.
Right.
This is the multi-tenancy.
But even if you have an extra management interface, it might make sense to go through the data interface to make sure that your CNF is alive. If you're but yeah.
Okay, that's for the CNFs. Yeah. Okay. Fair. Yeah, I see you. Miguel?
Yeah, I do think this makes sense. Like, I mean, overall, like everything on secondary networks nowadays, like there's literally no batteries included anywhere. So people have to do a bunch of stuff on their own. And like every now and then people want to get batteries and stuff like that. Would it make sense to just move that to like to phase 4, like the name of it was like extended functionality or something, because at the end of the day, as you said, it's something that is helpful to have, very nice to have, and it's comfortable. But it's like, let's say, if we need to move to offset something, I would offset this one.
Yeah, that's fair. But then if you think about this, if we were to, let's say phase 4 is sometime in 4 years. I'm exaggerating, but let's say that, right? Can we GA whatever we're gonna have here without those, right? Can we create it's a GA feature without those things? Or we will say that GA will be only in phase 4? That's my kind of
That's a
crunch
good
argument.
point. So about phase 3, which I just read now, it's called like basic Kubernetes features integration. I'd say that accessing the API and kubelet probing is like basic Kubernetes features.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. Let's do that. And that's fair point. So basically just pushing those out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So I agree.
a good point.
You made a really good point as well. Like, yeah, when should, like, what in the phases should be GA? And
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
phase 3 is clearly, I mean, if it were up to me, it would be phase 3.
That's a good point, yeah. Because, you know, one comment I got from team on this is, what if we stop on specific phase and not move forward? Can a specific phase be a standalone thing and just be with just that? That's something that we need to make sure that we can achieve, right? That's one thing that we need to make sure that if we go, let's say, with phase 1, just phase 1, is that acceptable? And let's say with the caveat that Michael brought up with saying that annotation initially create conditions to eventually make it a proper spec, right? And achieving those, and can the phase 1 just be a standalone thing, right? And I think that's what we need to look at it as well as that. Okay, so I think that's good. I will push those 3 over there to next phase, because we're probably going to push some of those things into phase 2 then. We are at a time. I think let's stop it here. I appreciate the comments and the discussion. That was really I think this was good. We can continue on this one next week. All right. Thanks everyone. All in States, happy Thanksgiving tomorrow, and yeah, see you next week.
All right, happy Thanksgiving and enjoy a quiet rest of the week too.
Yeah.
Everyone else. All right, take it easy.
Alright.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Bye. Happy Thanksgiving.